Today I'll show you how I made this abandoned kill team and painted their armor in battered angelic white. Howdy y'all, Patrick at Bombshell Miniatures. When I started looking around at the setting details for the Wrath and Glory role-playing game, I came across the Absolvers Chapter of Space Marines. The idea that I had was to set up a series of connected games, a campaign if you will, set in the Gilead sector, so I decided to paint up my kill team as Absolvers. According to the RPG setting book, the Forsaken System Guide, here's what it says about the isolated chapter of Absolvers. The Space Marines are the Emperor's Angels of Death, the mightiest warriors of the Imperium. They arrive like thunderbolts from the heavens, raining destruction on his enemies across the galaxy. Now ensnared within the Noctis Eterna, one chapter's ancient vow to defend the system may be all that stands between Gilead and eternal damnation. The Absolvers have been bound to Gilead since its earliest days and then became its home when its chapter master swore a grand oath to protect Gilead forever. Most of its numbers were trapped within when the Dark Storm erupted, and the chapter's commanders have not been heard from for long years. Even if the Absolvers could leave, they would never do so, for such is the permanence of their vow. Each day brings new perils to the chapter's future. Ammunition and other essentials are growing scarce. Viable gene seed stock is dwindling as well, meaning fewer scouts can progress to become full battle brothers. Chaos Space Marines grow bolder in their probing attacks from the Reach, and even within these hive cities, only firm conviction and vigilance offers any hope of preserving the chapter until the storm recedes. I wasn't able to get these Space Marine models whenever they were originally issued as blind boxes, so I decided to kit bash my own set using a basic box of Intercessors. However, now they're available in the Kill Team Starter set if you can find it. I needed to do a little bit of customizing on a couple of the models since the basic stock Intercessor kit didn't come with the options that I needed for the kill team. So I decided to make this camo cloak for the Eliminator, which is the sniper operative in the team. So I cut a little piece of facial tissue to the shape of the size of the cloak that I wanted, just using the size of the model as a rough guide. Then I loaded, I put the facial tissue out on a piece of zippy bag, like, plastic, so I could peel it off after it had set up a little bit. Here's where I went wrong, where I should have followed the grain a little bit closer of which direction that was running in the tissue paper, because if I'd have run that lengthwise, it would have made the tatters and so forth at the bottom of the cloak a little bit easier to tear off, and it would have looked a little bit better. However, I left the matte medium to sit for about, I want to say, half an hour or so that it was still a little damp, and I could manipulate the tissue paper and kind of shape it and create wrinkles and folds in it that I wanted to give it a natural cloth sort of a look. Still have it malleable without it being too plastic-like. So this is kind of tricky to tease this sort of damp tissue paper into place. There's been a couple of other comments that I saw where some other folks that were using this similar technique have used like dried out baby wipes or handy wipes from KFC or any of these other fast food places or something like that. I didn't have any of those handy, so basically all I had was just this this facial tissue to use at the time. I started doing this technique when I saw tips in Shepard Payne's How to Build Dioramas book on how to make tarps, draped over ammo crates and I guess aircraft and that sort of thing. So it seemed to be a fun process, and I made a couple of these way back in the second edition of 40K for some of my Eldar models as capes. But it's a little bit tricky since the tissue paper is damp, so you have to be kind of careful teasing it into place. I did want this to be tattered, and I wanted it to be, you know, torn and weathered looking in order to fit with the aesthetic of what I had in mind for the color scheme and what I wanted the finish of the models to look like. So here, once I got the tissue paper all into place, or at least it had the wrinkles and the texture of it that I wanted, I went ahead and brushed a little bit more matte medium on that so that it would create kind of a thick plastic layer. Now, once this is painted, this cape will still remain a little bit flexible, but the way that the paint is applied on there, I mean, even though I've sprayed, you know, a primer on there afterwards, which I'll show in just a moment, the paint won't flake off. It's going to stay put where it is because acrylic paint still remains a little bit flexible. Even after it's cured, the plastic binders in it allow it to have a little bit of leeway, which is why even when you paint flexible 3D prints, the paint doesn't flake off of those. It actually sticks to it. So from here I moved on, and with this particular model and the rest of the squad, I added a little bit of texture onto the boots around the base because I thought this would create a nice corroded look to their armor, trudging through the dirt and that dust. These bases that I created, the cracked texture on there is a Grelin earth, so it's a texture paste that Citadel puts out, or Games Workshop. And so I've brushed a little bit of that on the base and generic texture paste that I had mixed up from sand and a little bit of gray paint. And so I kind of wanted to work this texture up, sort of an ash waste kind of a look. It was what I had in mind for the bases. And so I wanted to work some of that up onto the boots and the lower leg areas to simulate a little bit more weathering, since these are, you know, abandoned Marines. And once all of that dried, the cape and the texturing material, I went ahead and sprayed all of these as a base coat of brown black, which creates a really nice even shadow color. And you would think it's like, well, why would I paint something, you know, brown black if the white, you know, is going to be their main color for their armor? But this created a really nice undertone for the shadow areas, and I didn't want to go straight black on that. And typically when I'm painting black and white, I don't paint I don't actually use black or white in that. And you'll see that even as I'm highlighting this up with ivory, it's actually going to read as white. There's not really, if I painted white on the armor and I wanted to highlight that up even more using white, I wouldn't have anywhere to go. That would be the highest, that would be the brightest color. So I'm actually starting with more of a mid-tone, and you can use, depending on if you want your whites to be more on the cool side or on the warm side, you can use like a cool gray color. And I know there's a lot of different paint brands out there that offer, you know, like a pre-mixed cool gray that you could use for this, or you could mix your own and put it in a little container and save that. You know, if you're going to paint a lot of stuff, you can kind of mix up your, you know, pre-mix up a batch and paint your whole model, you know, with that same color, or paint your whole force with that color. So in this instance, I wanted sort of a warm white to their armor. So I went ahead and used the ivory to overspray the black brown that I'm using as an undercoat. And you can see that there's a little bit here left in the shadows on the undersides of the models, which creates a good shaded color and a good shaded tone. And then I went ahead and matched all of this with the heads that I had left separate in order to make it a little bit easier to paint the details on there. Now, however, in this instance, I did paint the heads and the helmets white, but when I went back and did a wash over those, it actually toned them down and gave them a warm shadow effect that blended the helmets in with the rest of the armor. So you can kind of fool the eye into thinking that, you know, these two different whites are actually the same color when they're not. So I've attached the helmets that I was going to paint that were matching onto this little piece of sprue to make it a little bit easier to handle. And then the unhelmeted heads I left separate so that I could go in and paint their features separately. And then this little guy with the eyepiece, I guess it's a targeter or something like that, I wanted to give to my Eliminator sniper operative. From here I move on and paint the black parts of the model, and for this I like to use Payne's Gray because, as I was talking about earlier, I don't like to use pure black because if I wanted to create shadows, which we're going to do on the weapons later on, if I started with a black undercoat, then there's really nowhere to go in order to create shadows and so forth. So in this instance, like I said, I like to use Payne's Gray for that, and it provides a cool black color because when you add white to it, it turns kind of like a dark blue, like navy color almost. So to me, it makes it ideal for creating a natural color for weapons. So here I'm just taking my time and working around the details around the hand on that. If I did get a little bit of paint on there, then I can go back to my ivory color and touch that up, which I have to do in a couple of places later on anyway. So then I picked out a couple of other details. Now on this, I think this is I want to say maybe a Mark 6 Power Fist or something. I had this in my bits box from way back, and I want to say the Captain operative on this, I'd have to look again. I think this is the Captain model. He has the option of having a Power Fist on there, so I thought that would be really cool. The blind box model has this as an option, so I had that lying around, so I thought, you know, I'd build it with that sort of loadout. But he's still got his main bolter and bolt pistol as options on there. So in this instance, I just went and filled in those areas around the model that I wanted to have in this black color. Keeping the weathered look of the paint scheme in mind, I decided to go with this red oxide color rather than the bold pyrrole red. This has got more of a rust feel to it, and it reminds me of the same kinds of red that were used in the art for the Absolvers. So I tried to find something that would match pretty close to what that looked like. So it's a little bit tricky here to go around the trim of the shoulder pads, working my way around the details and so forth on that. I went ahead and painted the trim here, and I think there's some purity seals on this particular operative, so I painted the same red on that, and I had to go back and touch up a little bit of ivory on some of the places where it didn't quite get where I wanted it to. I thought this would be kind of a cool thing as sort of a squad marking or something like that to break up the white armor. So I add a little bit of trim on this particular knee pad. The neat thing about looking at the Absolvers chapter to me was that there weren't a lot of details or a lot of published material about this particular chapter, which meant that I had a lot of leeway in order to sort of customize the squad or the team the way that I wanted. So for this captain model, I also thought it would be kind of cool to shave off the Aquila across the chest armor on there so that I could paint squad marking on there. Then for some of the other details, it was handier to use this speed paint to go around and paint all of the pouches. So I gave them a base coat of this this reddish brown color, which to me worked alongside the red that I had chosen for the trim on their armor. I tried looking at a couple of other brown colors, and they seemed to be either, you know, too cool or too purplish, and it stood out too much. It contrasted too much against the comparison with the red details on their armor. So then, using a little small piece of packing foam, I went back and used the black-brown color in order to create chipping along the edges of the armor panels. This was just a matter of deciding, you know, where I thought the most wear would be, the edges that would see probably the most use, and concentrate the colors in those areas. Some of the other spots in between the arms, kind of against the legs, I went back and used a little tiny brush to go and add just a few little dots here and there. I didn't actually get that on camera, but it's fairly simple to use a little tiny brush and just, you know, follow along the edge of a particular panel and add some dots or little taps to create, you know, chipped paint off of this, whatever this ceramite material is that they say that their armor is made out of. So to me, it doesn't really, I don't really think of it more like rust as I do like, okay, if their armor is a ceramite, then it's like, well, what is that? What color is that underneath the paint? So it could be pretty much, you know, anything. It could be a dark color, or a light color if the armor is painted, you know, in a dark color. So it just depends on, you know, how you want to portray the materials that you're trying to represent. So after that speed paint had dried, I went back with golden brown color, and which is sort of an orange, like a warm brownish color, and created some little edge highlights along the pouches and straps. Then going back and highlighting the black areas, I took a little bit of the ivory and added that to the Payne's Gray so that I could go and run some chipping and weathering along the edges, or edge highlighting the different weapons. So this is just a small round dry brush that I went and just hit the corners and hit the edges in order to create a little bit of contrast along those areas. So in this is what I've decided to use for the camo cloak. So what I did was I put those three colors on my wet palette, and unfortunately I didn't have a separate camera where I could get pictures of this. Basically, I just put those three colors on the wet palette and then mixed in and out of those colors. So I created I added a little bit of brown to the green and a little bit of the golden brown to that in order to lighten it up, just to make a spread of different olive colors for the cloak. Now the cool thing about this is that this green color, because it's a complementary color, really works against the red details and the red trim on the armor. So working my way back and forth across the cape, I just went to the palette, mixed up different brown and different green colors, and just added little spots here and there in as much of a random pattern as I could. Here is another thing that I didn't actually capture on camera, but at the bottom of the cape you can see that I used a little bit of the texture paste, or that liquid green stuff that I applied to their boots, and I put that along the bottom of the cape in order to create texture on that to look like dried mud or whatever this ash waste is that they're trudging through, like if it had gotten wet or, you know, and stuck to the fabric. So it creates a really authentic looking, grimy, sort of grungy fabric that's been tattered. So before I got too far on the weathering, I wanted to add a few little decals on the models, and I thought, well, this would be kind of cool if they were like Team 5 for whatever reason. So I found a couple of little 5s on, I guess, the Space Marine transfer sheet, and added that on there. And then I didn't have any access to actual Absolver chapter badges. So I found a decal supplier online and ordered these. It looks like a little chalice with some laurel leaves on the side of that, and that was pretty close to what it seemed like the chapter badge was in the Forsaken System Guide. So I went ahead and used these. And if you'd like to use these decals, or you want to find some decals that are similar to these, I'll put a link down below in the description to where I ordered these, and then you can check out some of the other things that they have. So I went ahead and used the regular process of using microsol and microset to soften up the decals and make them conform a little bit more to the shoulders. This isn't a process that I use very much, but I decided that I wanted to do an oil wash on the armor for this particular team. Now, since I don't do this a lot, I'm not really sure what the best ratio of mineral spirits is to oil paint. So I mixed up this little batch, and then I realized that, okay, well, there's way too much paint in this for the kind of effect that I want to do, because I really intended to do a pen wash on this to basically just fill in some of the panel lines and around some of the details and leave the majority of the white armor showing. So I went and just transferred a little bit of the mix into another container with some more mineral spirits in it, and this diluted it to the consistency that I was looking for in order to do this particular kind of an oil wash. So you can see here that I'm kind of working back and forth between the two containers in order to bring the pigment up and the saturation in the wash that I'm looking for. And so sometimes that takes a little bit more pigment, and sometimes it takes a little bit more mineral spirits. But you can see that as I brush it up on the side of the cup, that it's giving me the transparency that I'm looking for. Then I went and just applied this wash to the creases and the crevices where I thought would collect the most shading or the most grime or whatever. Now, I did run it along the upper panels, as you can see there, which did tint it just a little bit. But that's easily resolved, especially using, oil paints in this regard, because instead of waiting until it dried, I just went back and used a little makeup sponge to clean away some of the upper surfaces that I didn't want as grimy in order to preserve those highlights. After that dried, if there was a little bit left over, then I could take just straight mineral spirits and go back and continue to clean that off of the areas that I didn't want stained as much. I decided that this Caribbean ocean color would be great to use for the eye lenses on their helmets. So I went ahead and just brushed that into the area on the eye lenses and left it as it is. But here you can see that I've already done the oil wash over the helmets, which gave them the shading, which tinted that down, the white primer, pretty much like their ivory armor was. So once I attach these, it should match close enough. I used a black wash over the weapons where I had already highlighted them with the Payne's Gray and Ivory mix. So this deepens the shadows and gives it a little bit of lining around some of the details. The barrels were all painted in just a regular bright silver color with the intent that putting the wash over it would tone that bright silver down. It was really tricky painting these tiny little heads on camera, but I decided to use ivory, tan flesh as a base color, burnt sienna, and then this mahogany color, which it's kind of a more reddish sienna tone. So I started off with a mix of the mahogany and a little bit of the tan flesh and used that as a base color to create a shadow undertone over all of the face. After that was dry, I continued to add a little bit more tan flesh to that to bring the tone up to a more Caucasian flesh color. I mainly brushed that over the upper areas in order to create highlights, keeping my focus on the center of the face as if the light was coming from right directly in front of and just above their heads. Then I continued to work the flesh tones up after that had dried, adding a little bit more ivory to the tan flesh color to continue to bring the highlights up. Here the paint is very, very thin and it dries fairly quickly. So in order to give it a good blending between the undercolor and the highlight color, I use kind of a stippling sort of a motion with just the very tip of the brush, and it's very lightly applied. So all I'm doing is just touching just the highest areas in order to create these highlights as I'm working the colors up to create contrast. Then at its brightest point, it's almost pure ivory with just a little bit of the tan flesh color in it. So to create this ash waste look, I just basically went back to black, brown, and ivory for the overall color of the texture of the base, and then I ran the base rim in dark umber. It was a little bit tricky getting the paint in between these cracks on that texture paste, but if you thin the paint down enough, it does work its way down into the recesses. After I got the base colors on there, I just added a little bit of ivory to that to create a highlight and just dry brushed that over the top. I didn't really want there to be a lot of details on their bases, and I wanted it to contrast with their white armor. Then I took a little bit of this color and added that to the bottoms of their, the lower parts of their boots and the cloak. Then it was just a matter of doing the base rim, and then these guys were done. Did I pick the right guys for my Angels of Death kill team? What do you think of this battered white armor paint scheme? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed seeing this process, then click the like button and be sure to subscribe to catch more ongoing projects like the Gravediggers Regiment that YouTube may be suggesting for you next, where I will see you on the workbench.